You can't even imagine what it feels like to bury your wife of 42 years, only to have your own son drive you out to a remote road and tell you, this is where you get off. If you think you know how this story ends, you're in for a shock. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and the secrets we keep from each other. Before I tell you what happened on that lonely road, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, or if you've ever discovered a secret that turned your world upside down, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and your voice matters here. Let me take you back to the day of my wife's funeral. The church was packed. Neighbors, old friends, even people I hadn't seen in decades. My son, David, stood by my side, his face a mask of grief, and something else I couldn't quite place. My daughter, Emily, flew in from out of state, her eyes red from crying. We said our goodbyes, laid my wife to rest, and I thought for a moment that the worst was over. But I was wrong. After the service, David offered to drive me home. I was exhausted, numb, barely able to think straight. We drove in silence for a while, the city fading behind us, the roads growing narrower, the trees closing in. I didn't notice at first. We'd taken a different route, but I trusted my son. Why wouldn't I? Then, without warning, he pulled over on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. He turned off the engine, looked at me and said, "Dad, this is where you get off." I stared at him, thinking it was some kind of sick joke, but his face was stone cold. "You don't belong with us anymore," he said. "Mom left everything to me. There's nothing for you now." You might be wondering how a son could do that to his own father. I was wondering the same thing. But as I stood there, watching his car disappear down the road, I realized there was more to this story than I understood. What had my wife told him? What did he think he knew? And why was he so sure I had nothing left? If you want to know what secrets tore my family apart, and how I found the strength to fight back, keep watching. Because the truth was buried deeper than any grave, and the revenge that followed was sweeter than I ever imagined. That night, I walked for miles, my mind racing. I replayed every conversation, every argument, every moment I'd shared with my wife and son. I remembered the way David had started acting distant after my wife got sick, the way he'd whispered with her behind closed doors, the way he'd looked at me at the funeral, like I was a stranger in my own family. When I finally made it to a gas station, I called Emily. She was frantic, demanding to know where I was. I told her everything. She was silent for a long time, then said, "Dad, I think there's something you need to see. Come stay with me tonight. We'll figure this out together." If you've ever had your world turned upside down by someone you trusted, you know how hard it is to keep going. But you also know that sometimes the only way to survive is to find out the truth, no matter how painful it is. What would you do if your own child turned on you? Would you fight back, or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who lost everything after being betrayed at Thanksgiving, watch it next. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hide the deepest secrets. That night, as I lay on Emily's couch, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my wife's will, about the way David had spoken to me, about the secrets that must have been whispered in the dark. I knew I had to find out the truth, even if it destroyed what was left of my family. You ever lie awake at night, replaying every moment, every word, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. That's what I did on Emily's couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of her old refrigerator. I kept seeing David's face, cold and determined, as he left me on that gravel road. I kept hearing his words. "Mum left everything to me. There's nothing for you now." It didn't make sense. My wife and I had always made decisions together, or so I thought. The next morning, Emily handed me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me, her face serious. "Dad, I found something," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of emails, legal documents, and a draft of my wife's will. My hands shook as I read through them. According to the paperwork, my wife had changed her will just weeks before she died, leaving the house, the savings, and even her personal belongings to David. There was a note attached, in her handwriting. "David will take care of everything. Trust him." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Why would she do this? Why would she trust David over me, or even over Emily? I looked at my daughter, searching for answers. "Did you know about this?" I asked. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, Dad, I had no idea. But there's more." She pulled out another document, a letter, unsigned but in my wife's handwriting. It was addressed to David. "You must protect our family. Your father can't be trusted with the finances. He's made mistakes before. I'm counting on you." My heart pounded. What mistakes? I'd always handled our money carefully. Sure, there were a few bad investments years ago, but nothing that would justify this. Emily leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Dad, I think David convinced Mum you were hiding something, that you'd lost money, or maybe even had debts she didn't know about." "Did you?" I shook my head, anger and confusion swirling inside me. "No, I told her everything. We had some rough years, but I never lied to her. Never. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, you know how helpless it feels. But you also know that the only way to clear your name is to find the truth, no matter how deep you have to dig." Emily and I spent the day going through old files, bank statements, and emails. The more we looked, the more it became clear. Someone had been feeding my wife lies. There were emails from David warning her about Dad's risky behavior, suggesting she move assets into his name for safekeeping. There were even messages from a lawyer, David's friend, advising her to protect herself and the family. I felt sick. My own son had manipulated his dying mother, convincing her I was a threat. He'd played on her fears, twisted the truth, and isolated me when I needed her most. And now he'd left me with nothing. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, you know the pain cuts deeper than any wound. What would you do if you discovered your child had turned your spouse against you? Would you confront them or walk away? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the son who tried to steal his father's legacy, watch it next. Sometimes the greatest revenge is the truth. That night, Emily and I made a plan. We would confront David, not with anger, but with evidence. We would show him what we'd found, demand answers, and fight for what was rightfully ours. I didn't know if it would heal our family or tear it apart for good, but I knew I couldn't let him get away with it. As I lay in bed, I thought about my wife, about the woman I'd loved for more than 4 decades. I wondered if she'd really believed I was a danger, or if she'd just been scared, confused, and manipulated by the son she trusted most. I promised myself and her memory that I would get to the bottom of it. no matter what it took. You ever walk into a room knowing the next words out of your mouth could change your family forever? That's how I felt as Emily and I drove to David's house the next morning. The sky was grey, the air heavy with the kind of tension you can feel in your bones. Emily gripped the folder of evidence in her lap, her jaw set. I could see the pain in her eyes, pain for her mother, for me, and for the brother she thought she knew. When we arrived, David answered the door with a look of surprise that quickly turned defensive. "What are you doing here?" he asked, glancing nervously at the folder in Emily's hands. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. "About Mum, about the will, about everything." David tried to brush us off, but Emily wouldn't let him. She laid out the documents on the kitchen table, emails, bank statements, the letter from our mother. "Why did you do it, David?" she demanded. "Why did you lie to Mum? Why did you turn her against Dad?" He looked at the papers, his face pale. For a moment I thought he might deny everything. But then he slumped into a chair, his bravado gone. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Mum was scared. She thought Dad was going to lose everything. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to protect us." I stared at him, anger and heartbreak warring inside me. "You wanted to protect yourself," I said quietly. "You convinced her I was a danger, that I couldn't be trusted. You took everything from me and from Emily." David's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought if I could control things, we'd be safe. I never wanted to hurt anyone. If you've ever confronted someone you love about a betrayal, you know how complicated the truth can be. Sometimes people do terrible things for reasons they think are right. But that doesn't make the pain any less real." Emily was shaking. "You left Dad on the side of the road, David, after Mum's funeral. How could you?" David buried his face in his hands. "I thought he'd be better off without us. I don't know what I thought. I was angry. I was scared. I'm sorry." If you've ever heard an apology that comes too late, you know how hollow it can sound. But you also know that forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd betrayed me. "You need to make this right, David, not just for me, but for your mother's memory, for Emily, for yourself." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise. If you've ever had to fight for your place in your own family, you know how exhausting it is, but you also know that sometimes the only way to heal is to face the truth, no matter how ugly it is." That night, Emily and I went home, the folder of evidence still in her hands. We didn't know what would happen next. Would David keep his promise? Would we ever be a family again? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let anyone write the end of my story but me. If you've ever had to reclaim your life after betrayal, you know how hard it is to take that first step. But you also know how powerful it feels to finally stand up for yourself. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you forgive, or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found justice after being cast aside, watch it next. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is living your truth. You ever feel like you're living in someone else's story, just waiting for your chance to take the pen back? That's how I felt in the days after confronting David. The truth was out, but the damage was done. Emily and I waited, hoping David would do the right thing, but the silence from his end was deafening. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped, wondering if it was him, ready to make amends, or if he'd just disappear for good. Emily tried to keep busy, but I could see the worry eating at her. What if he doesn't fix it, Dad? What if he just keeps everything? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent my whole life believing that family meant loyalty, that blood was thicker than water. But now I wasn't so sure. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. A week passed before David finally called. His voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Dad, Emily, can we meet?" We agreed, and he came to Emily's house, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, and slid a stack of papers across to me. "I talked to Mum's lawyer. I'm signing everything back. The house, the accounts, even the personal things. I don't want them anymore. I just want my family back." I looked at the documents, my heart pounding. It was all there, every asset, every account, every piece of my wife's legacy. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Emily burst into tears, hugging her brother, relief and pain mixing on her face. David looked at me, his eyes red. "I'm sorry, Dad. I let fear and greed get the best of me. I thought I was protecting us, but I was just protecting myself. I hope you can forgive me." If you've ever been offered an apology after a deep betrayal, you know how complicated forgiveness can be. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing to move forward, for your own sake. I took a deep breath. "David, I can't forget what you did, but I can forgive you, for your mother's sake, for Emily, for all of us." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Dad. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." That night, as I sat on Emily's porch, watching the stars, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The pain was still there, but so was hope. Hope that we could rebuild, that we could be a family again, not the same as before, but maybe stronger for what we'd survived. If you've ever had to choose between holding on to anger and letting go for the sake of peace, you know how hard that choice can be. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you let your child back in, or would you keep your distance? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found redemption after betrayal, watch it next. Sometimes the greatest revenge is forgiveness. The next morning, I called my wife's lawyer myself. I wanted to make sure everything was legal, that there would be no more surprises. The lawyer confirmed the paperwork was in order, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe again. Emily made breakfast, and we sat together, talking about the future, about how we'd honor my wife's memory, about how we'd move forward as a family. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after everything we'd been through, that was enough. You ever realize that even after the truth comes out, the scars don't just fade away? That's what I learned in the weeks after David returned everything. The paperwork was done, the accounts were back in my name, and the house that once felt lost was mine again. But every time I walked through those rooms, I felt the echo of betrayal. The silence was different now, heavier but also honest. There was no more pretending. Emily tried to fill the house with life again. She brought over flowers, cooked dinner, invited old friends. We laughed, we remembered my wife, and we tried to stitch together the pieces of what was left. But sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself staring at the old family photos, wondering how we'd gotten here. How a family built on love could be torn apart by fear and misunderstanding. David kept his distance at first. He called every few days, checking in, always apologizing, always asking if there was anything he could do. I could hear the guilt in his voice, the regret. One afternoon, he showed up at the door, holding a box of my wife's things. "I thought you should have these," he said quietly. Inside were letters, old birthday cards, and a journal I'd never seen before. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the journal. My wife's handwriting filled the pages, memories, hopes, fears. There were entries about me, about Emily, and about David. But what struck me most were the pages she wrote in her final months. She was scared, confused, and desperate to protect her family. She wrote about her doubts, about the pressure David put on her, about the fear that she was making a mistake. One line stopped me cold. "I hope David does the right thing. I hope he remembers what family means." I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I understood. My wife hadn't meant to cut me out. She'd been manipulated, yes, but she'd also been afraid. She wanted to protect us all, even if it meant making the wrong choice. If you've ever discovered the truth too late, you know how bittersweet it feels. There's relief, but also grief for what could have been. What would you do if you found out your loved one doubted you in their final days? Would you hold on to the pain, or would you let it go? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found peace after years of conflict, watch it next. Sometimes the only way to heal is to forgive the past. The next morning I called David. I told him about the journal, about what his mother had written. We talked for hours, about her, about us, about the mistakes we'd all made. For the first time, there was no anger, no blame, just honesty. David came over that weekend. We sat in the backyard, the sun warm on our faces, and talked about starting over. Emily joined us, and for a moment it felt like we were a family again. Not perfect, not the same, but real. If you've ever had to rebuild trust after it's been shattered, you know how slow the process can be, but you also know that every small step forward is a victory. That day, as we sat together, I realized that revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your life, your family, and your peace. You ever wonder if forgiveness is really possible after a betrayal that deep? That's what I kept asking myself as the days turned into weeks and our family tried to find its footing again. The paperwork was finished, the assets were back, but the wounds were still fresh. Sometimes I'd catch David looking at me with a mix of hope and fear, as if he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Emily was the bridge between us. She called David for Sunday dinners, invited him to help with repairs around the house, and made sure we were never alone in a room for too long. I could see she was trying to heal us, to bring back the family she remembered from childhood. And slowly it started to work. One Sunday, as we sat around the table, David finally spoke up. "Dad, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to earn your trust back. I want to be part of this family again." His voice was steady, but his eyes were pleading. I looked at him for a long moment. Trust isn't given, David. It's built, and it takes time. But you're here. You're trying. That's a start. He nodded, relief washing over his face. Emily smiled, tears in her eyes. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. If you've ever tried to rebuild a relationship after it's been broken, you know how fragile those first steps can be. But you also know how every shared meal, every honest conversation is a small miracle. What would you do if you had the chance to start over with someone who hurt you? Would you take it, or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found strength in forgiveness, watch it next. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart again. As the weeks passed, David became more involved. He helped Emily with her garden, fixed the leaky roof, and even started coming to my doctor's appointments. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, moments of tension, and memories that still stung. But there was also laughter, shared stories, and a sense of family I thought I'd lost forever. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, David turned to me. "Dad, I want you to know, I'm proud to be your son. I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize what really matters." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes, David. What matters is what we do next." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that revenge isn't always about payback. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your peace, your dignity, and your family. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well. You ever look around and realize the life you're living now is nothing like the one you imagined? But maybe, just maybe, it's better in ways you never expected. That's how I felt as the months rolled by and our family found a new rhythm. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was softer now, like an old scar that aches only when the weather changes. Emily's laughter filled the house again. She started hosting Sunday dinners, inviting old friends and new ones, making sure there was always room at the table for David. I watched my children rebuild their bond, and I realized that sometimes the best thing a parent can do is step back and let healing happen on its own time. David changed too. He became more thoughtful, more present. He started volunteering at the local food pantry, helping people who'd lost their way. One afternoon, he asked if I'd join him. At first, I hesitated, old wounds still tender, but I agreed. Working side by side, handing out groceries, and listening to strangers' stories, I saw a side of my son I hadn't seen in years. He was humble, kind, and grateful for a second chance. If you've ever watched someone you love grow after making a terrible mistake, you know how bittersweet it feels. There's pride, but also a lingering ache for the time lost. What would you do if you could turn back the clock? Would you change the past, or would you accept the lessons it brought? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found hope after heartbreak, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is letting go and moving forward. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, David and I sat on the porch, sharing a quiet moment. He turned to me, his voice steady. "Dad, I know I can never erase what I did, but I want you to know, I'm grateful you gave me another chance. I won't waste it." I looked at him, feeling a mix of sadness and pride. "We all stumble, son. What matters is that we get back up, and that we help each other along the way." That night, as I closed my eyes, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The road to forgiveness had been long and painful, but it had brought us somewhere new, somewhere real. And for the first time since my wife's funeral, I felt like I was home. You might think a story like this ends with a grand gesture or a dramatic confrontation, but the truth is, real healing happens in the quiet moments, the ones nobody else sees. As the first anniversary of my wife's passing approached, I found myself reflecting on everything we'd survived, The betrayal, the heartbreak, the long road back to forgiveness. I realized that while I'd lost the woman I loved, I'd gained something I never expected, a deeper understanding of what family really means. Emily planned a small memorial in the backyard, just family and a few close friends. We shared stories, laughed, and cried together. David stood beside me, no longer the son who'd left me on a remote road, but a man who'd faced his own darkness and had chosen to come back. He read a letter he'd written to his mother, apologizing for the pain he'd caused and promising to honor her memory by being a better son, a better brother, and a better man. After the memorial, as the sun set and the guests drifted home, David and I sat together in the quiet. "Dad," he said, "I know I can never undo what I did, but I hope you know how much I love you. I hope you can be proud of me again someday." I looked at him, my heart full. "I already am, son. We've both made mistakes, but we're still here. We're still family. That's what matters." If you've ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply, you know it's not about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to move forward, together. What would you do if you had the chance to rebuild what was broken? Would you take it? Or would you let the pain define you? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found peace after years of conflict, watch it next. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living a life filled with love, not bitterness. As the days passed, I found myself looking forward to the future again. Emily started a new job, David continued his volunteer work, and I found comfort in the simple routines of daily life. The house was quieter, but it was filled with hope, a hope I thought I'd lost forever. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, I realized that the road my son left me on wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where forgiveness, resilience, and love mattered more than any inheritance or old grudge. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of my journey. Maybe you faced your own betrayals, or maybe you're still searching for a way to heal. Whatever your story, know that you're not alone. There's always a way back, even from the loneliest road. So what would you do if your own child turned their back on you? Would you fight for your family, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check out our other videos, especially the one about the father who found redemption after being cast aside. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through and the ones we choose to tell. Thank you for listening. Hold your loved ones close and remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the ultimate strength.